Hello everyone, welcome back to the Crypto Weekly Analysis Volume 19. Again, we're going to be giving you an insight of what we think is going to happen next week and also compare our analysis from last week also. So what we were mentioning last week with Bitcoin, so just as a quick recap, this is the all-time high, this is the new low that's been created, and we're pretty much in this range right now. So we're just trying to figure out what we're seeing right now. Essentially, my bias is that I want price to drop below the 28k region, so that's where I think price can go to. So what we mentioned last week is this barrier here at the 38k mark. And ultimately what I was explaining to you guys is that if we can break this, we should be able to be confident that the bearish pressure is still going to run through, and we could expect price to drop off into the 28k region. So looking at this week, we can clearly see that we've made a massive turnaround towards the upside, so that's not of a problem at all. One thing that I wanted to just clarify, that there is one possibility that could happen, and that is if price breaks towards the upside, then it's most likely that we could get a bigger drop towards the downside, like so, or it could then begin the drop rather. So there, it's pretty much now what we're talking about is we're not trading this as you know, on a leverage positioning or short-term trades. We're looking at this from a long-term perspective. Okay, so we're essentially trying to get to the downside here, and essentially we're just looking at all the different variables of how price could approach the downside way. So one option is that if we don't break this 38k barrier, then and we break the upside, then this is where this scenario comes into play. But if we do get a price to break the 38k barrier, then we'll get price to ultimately push down into the 28k barrier. So that's pretty much where I'm roughly standing for now. And of course, we're not expecting price to push up higher, but if it does, then we will come back with another analysis video. Okay, so that's where price breaks the all-time high. So yeah, so let's move on now to Ripple and see how it's had a cross-board effect. So with Ripple, looking at this, it's not really done exactly too much, but we've had a bit of a bullish rise with the market as Bitcoin's obviously been pushing up higher and higher. So for me, this doesn't necessarily look as strong for price to completely turn around. But again, we're just going to keep it simple, looking at the $1.40 range. So if price does go above this level, I'll be asking questions to myself. Okay, what's the next thing? Okay, so let's just quickly draw a fib, because I think I may have saw something quickly. Okay, so let's zoom in. Have we actually touched? Okay, so we've not actually touched the 618. So there is a possibility of price pushing over and then dropping towards the downside. Okay, so let me just move all this across. It looks very messy right now. But essentially that is one scenario that we could look at, and it's still possible. Let's take RSI. There's not that much of a divergence, but there is and there isn't, if that kind of makes sense. So there's a little bit. So I could assume that there is a possibility of price pushing up higher and then rallying over, and that could make sense with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin does that, then there is a similar approach like that. So let's just see what happens with that. Cardano, I think what we were expecting, again, similar thing, is that we could expect price to make another high. So that could also tie in with the Bitcoin theory of pushing up higher and then dropping off. So that's kind of making sense right now. And then we're expecting price to reach back down into that $1 range, as you know. Let's move on to now Litecoin. Let's take a look. Okay, so we're seeing price rally up a little bit higher. Let's take a look at the fib. Let's stretch it out. So from the low to the high. Okay, so this one, I believe we should be able to stay below the 7K range. So let's get rid. So essentially, I think what we were saying last week, that if we can break the 4,800 barrier to the downside, we should be able to push lower. That's just having that sentimental pressure, in the sense where other people see that the bears are kicking in. So ultimately, we're trying to reach that 3,000 mark, really. But yeah, this one should be fine. But if price does again break the 7,500 barrier, I'll be asking questions about, are we pushing up higher now, or are we still pushing lower? Okay, so but for now, I think we're still okay. So moving on to Ethereum. So what we can see here is again that bullish pressure coming into play, and like I said, we've got the other three scenarios drawn out here. So let's just pull out the fib. So I think this one should be okay. Yeah, we're fine. So we're not really touched the 618 fib. So what possibilities are for this as one again scenario that we could look and add to, is that on the shorter term scale, we could get price to push and break the high and then drop all the way back down. So again, this is very close of a scenario, because it's very close towards breaking the the all-time high. And if so, then that's when we can delete this scenario, delete this one, and start to look at these two. So I'm going to push this across just a little bit more. So yeah, so I hope you kind of understand where I'm getting at with that level and range. And yeah, essentially we could have, like I said, if Bitcoin does pretty much push higher and higher, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Ethereum, because it could eventually drop off with Bitcoin, or we'll start to see price break above this high, which is the all-time high. And then if so, then we're going to have to take a look at our analysis once more in a bit more depth. So Dogecoin, we are getting closer, but we've had a bit of a rally towards the upside, a small one, but nothing too major. I don't think this one has anything in particular. So what we could expect is price to probably just mess around with Bitcoin if it does push higher, and then eventually rally towards the downside. Push lower towards the downside. So I think this one's fine. Again, from this level, I think that if we break this lower high, we should lower high, yeah. Well, basically the 35 cents range. I think that's when we're going to be asking questions, is this going to be a bit more bullish now? But yeah, definitely still expecting price to drop lower still. So moving on to our last pair, Egld. So I think what we spoke about last week was the possibility of price making its way towards the upside. We can see something forming here, but what we're expecting is price to probably break lower. So if we move to the daily, I'll give you a bit of a perspective. So this red line is that high, so let me get rid of that. So this is pretty much the where we are with the market. So what I'm thinking is price still has the possibility of dropping lower, and it makes sense with Bitcoin if it does one more push higher. So if you drop back down to the 4, so again, if I move this across like so, essentially what we're trying to do is that there is a possibility of price to extend just a little bit higher and then drop off. Okay, so that's something that we could expect, and that would possibly make sense with Bitcoin. because as I said, Bitcoin, we're possibly looking at price to push up higher and then drop off, and this can have that same effect. So we're looking to then possibly target this low, this low. Again, it really just depends how far we're trying to get to, but essentially once we start to break this low, we could then possibly look at a short-term buy, but again, that's short-term. And again, mainly we're trying to see what happens once we break the new high, which is this one, because once we break the new high, we will start to see some manipulation here, and that's where we could expect a massive drop. So if you do want to take a buy once we get to this downside, you could cash out here or just pretty much lock in some profits, etc. And then we'll expect price to drop off and possibly break between these lows here, or maybe within the 150 range, and that's where your longer term buys are going to kick in. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much where I stand for this week. Nothing too crazy, I guess. I think that the bull run, the bullish pressure from Bitcoin has done quite an across the board effect with everything. So this one's quite interesting how it's pushed up, and you can see how the other pairs have kind of reciprocated that bullish pressure. So we'll see what's going to come through next week. And again, we've got two scenarios drawn out as a recap for Bitcoin. So price to push up higher and then drop off, which kind of looks like it would make sense through the other pairs, but again, it really depends. And then the other one is if it just completely melts towards the downside to the 28k region. So yeah, that's where I'm looking at for next week, within these two ranges, so the 53k barrier to the 38k barrier. So we'll see what happens throughout the week. And yeah, so again guys, if you did get any value from this video, do leave a like and make sure you're subscribed. If you have any other questions, feel free to let me know, and we do have a trading group that you can join, so that link is in the description. So thank you very much for listening guys, and we'll see you all in our next video.